Alright, we're back. With episode 105, book 10, chapter 2. We continue in part 2. The title of this chapter is Differences in Civilization to What Do? Book 10 is the Law of Human Progress. We are reading Progress and Poverty. An inquiry into the cause of industrial paralysis and the increase of want with the increase of wealth. The book I've read twice and don't know the title of. An inquiry into the cause of industrial, not paralysis, depressions, and of increase of want with increase of wealth. The remedy. Of course, of course. Alright, we'll get it. George writes, the Janissaries were made up of youths torn from Christian parents at an early age, but they were nonetheless fanatical Muslims and nonetheless exhibited Turkish traits. The Jesuits and other orders show distinct character, but it is certainly not perpetuated by hereditary transmissions. But even such associations as schools or regiments, where the components remain but a short time and are constantly changing, exhibit general characteristics, which are the result of mental impressions perpetuated by association. So I guess we're still in the nature-nurture discussion. Now it is this body of traditions, beliefs, customs, laws, habits, and associations which arise in every community and which surround every individual. This superorganic environment, as Herbert Spencer calls it, that, as I take, is the great element in determining national character. It is this, rather than hereditary transmission, which makes the Englishman differ from the Frenchman, the German from the Italian, the American from the Chinaman, and the civilized man from the savage man. It is in this way that national traits are preserved, extended, or altered. Within certain limits, or if you choose, without limits in itself, hereditary transmission may develop or alter qualities, but this is much more true of the physical than of the mental part of a man, and much more true of animals than it is even of the physical part of man. Deductions from the breeding of pigeons or cattle will not apply to man, and the reason is clear. The life of man, even in his rudest state, is infinitely more complex. He is constantly acted on by an infinitely greater number of influences, amid which the relative influence of heredity becomes less and less. A race of men with no greater mental activity than the animals, men who only ate, drank, slept, and propagated, might, I doubt not, by careful treatment and selection in breeding, be made in course of time to exhibit as great diversities in bodily shape and character as similar means have produced in the domestic animals. But there are no such men, and in men as they are, mental influences acting through the mind upon the body would constantly interrupt the process. You cannot fatten a man whose mind is on the strain by cooping him up and feeding him as you would fatten a pig. In all probability, men have been upon the earth longer than many species of animals. They have been separated from each other under differences of climate that produce the most marked differences in animals, and yet the physical differences between the different races of men are hardly greater than the differences between white horses and black horses. They are certainly nothing like as great as between dogs of the same subspecies, as, for instance, the different varieties of the terrier or spaniel. And even these physical differences between races of men, it is held by those who account for them by natural selection and hereditary transmission, were brought out when man was much nearer the animal, that is to say, when he had less mind. Again, my point always with nature or nurture is kind of like, so what? As long as you grant the sanctity of human life, if it's all nature, all nurture, or some part one, some part, it's clearly some part one and some part the other. But even if it were, that all green-skinned men were brilliant and all purple-skinned men uh, were dumb, does it make sense? Is it still just if all humans are if all human life is sacred and justice is receiving the full reward of your labor, less whatever you have taken from the common lot, if there's not enough for everyone, the conclusions of this book and of Henry George's ideas still hold, or the land value tax principles still hold. The necessity of land and all of the tyranny that comes out of it is still the mechanism that rules the world. Um, and you can just spend so much time arguing and discussing and doing studies on what environmental factors, determine your performance as a human versus what does genetics do. I don't know. I mean, I just watched, hello Javi, just watched the new Alien movie. Uh, that gets you thinking about DNA and genetics and reproduction in really weird ways, fun ways, uh, gross ways. um, but if we were to agree that xenomorphs were all, equally sacred and they all deserve the same amount of access to nature as any other xenomorph, whether it comes of a human or a dog or a engineer, who knows? Anyway, I think the human species, yeah, that kind of morality then of like why do I think the human species is more deserving than the xenomorph species? Uh, I mean, I don't know. I just believe it. I feel it. I feel it. Humans should live, and xenomorphs uh, should not. And is that purely because xenomorphs started the aggression? Because they sure seem to be very loyal to their own kind. And if we're just loyal, like, so humans are loyal to humans. Humans want to take up a bunch of resources. Xenomorphs are loyal to xenomorphs, and they want to take up a bunch of resources, and they know that they're probably going to have to, or well, I don't know. They could have tried to cooperate with us. Yeah, I don't know. I guess they started it as the best. I don't know. George continues. Robert Sapolsky seems to be more, it's nurture based on our available nurture, but ugh, need more research. Writes Javier. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what your starting point was of where you felt before reading Sapolsky, like how much did you feel was nurture versus genetics? I don't know where you felt that balance was. Maybe you were where I'm at, or maybe you were more genetics than I was, who knows? I just find that those discussions are like kind of interesting, especially like I guess if you're a young parent and you're trying to figure out what's worth doing or significant, what you have control and responsibility over, I guess. Um, I would say having a purebred greyhound dog and hanging out with lots of greyhounds and seeing how, um, you know, sort of unique the greyhound personality is, but you think it's your dog, and you meet 100 other greyhounds, and they all act the same, and then you realize their personality is very largely determined by genetics. That kind of opened my eyes a bit, and I've only sort of been friends. I've only sort of known a couple of pit bulls, and they have all been fiercely loyal. Um, and very fearful, and I've, one of them like bit me and attacked a neighbor's dog, and I, so I'm very speciesist with dogs. Anyway, and again, my point, is that whatever determines your capabilities doesn't deny the fundamental idea that human life is sacred and that labor deserves its full reward and that it's unjust and tyrannical for some people to be lords of the earth lords. We shouldn't call them, we could call them landlords, but they're nature lords, earth tyrants. But that is, I mean, and then the next reflection is always like, what should a landlord do if they sell their land? It's just going to be hoarded by another landlord. It is a species civilization issue. And then how do we fix civilization issues? Well, electoral politics seems game theoretically, um, what's the word? Not degenerate. Electoral politics is degenerate. It is dominated by the wealthy who are not representative of the whole class of people. It is dominated by a two-party system and a bundling of very disparate policy positions. I don't know. All right, back to George. Of the jungle, of the earth. Can't fatten him up like a pig. Probably been around longer. White horses, black horses, spaniel. Um, and even these physical differences it is held by those who account for them by natural selection and hereditary transmission, were brought out when man was much nearer the animal, that is to say, when he had less mind. And if this be true of the physical constitution in man, how much higher degree is it true of his mental constitution? All our physical parts we bring with us into the world, but the mind develops afterward. There is a stage in the growth of every organism in which it cannot be told, except by the environment, whether the animal that is to be will be fish or reptile, monkey or man. And so with the newborn infant, whether the mind that is yet to awake to consciousness and power is to be English or German, American or Chinese, the mind of a civilized man or the mind of a savage, depends entirely on the social environment in which it is placed. Take a number of infants born of the most highly civilized parents and transport them to an uninhabited country. Suppose them, I remember this example. Suppose them in some miraculous way to be sustained until they have come of age to take care of themselves. But what would you have? More helpless savages than any we know of. They would have fire to discover, the rudest tools and weapons to invent, language to construct. They would, in short, have to stumble their way to the simplest knowledge, which the lowest races now possess, just as a child learns to walk. That they would in time do all these things, I have not the slightest doubt, for all these possibilities are latent in the human mind, just as the power of walking is latent in the human frame. But I do not believe they would do them any better or worse, any slower or quicker, than the child of barbarian parents placed in the same conditions. Given the very highest mental powers that exceptional individuals have ever displayed, and what could mankind be if one generation were separated from the next by an interval of time, as are the 17-year locusts? Yeah, that would be pretty funny. If how do the 17-year locusts work? Like there's like eggs planted, and then like the cicadas, those eggs just sit there. How are cicada born? They're um after 16 weeks, the nymphs hatch and fall to the ground. They then burrow underground and attach to tree roots, where they spend their time tunneling and sucking sap. This underground period, called the dormant period, can last 2 to 17 years depending on the species. Wait, I'm confused. So they're just like attached to tree roots, tunneling around and eating food. So they are sort of alive. I mean, yeah, they're alive. And they're just sucking sap. So yeah, imagine if every baby we had, I don't know how long does a cicada even live, but every baby just burrowed under the earth and drank from tree roots for 100 years till all other living adult humans died, and then they all reemerged. I suppose if you could design some robots and AI in one lifetime, well, it'd be interesting if each human. It'd be interesting, yeah, if each generation could only educate the next generation without being with them. They had to just leave them, books, toys, film, technology, or whatever. Uh, yeah, that's a fun sci-fi premise. Like, suppose we know that we're about to be wiped. Yeah, we're about to be wiped out, and we know we can like stash a bunch of our human eggs, and that they will all reemerge later. But we can prepare the world for them when they come back, so that they can do the best they can. It's kind of funny. Like, yeah, I want to make a sci-fi novel where we live the life cycle of cicadas and have human intelligence. And reversely, George writes, suppose a number of savage infants could, unknown to the mothers, for even this would be necessary to make the experiment a fair one, be substituted for as many children of civilization. Can we suppose that growing up they would show any difference? I think no one who has mixed much with different peoples and classes will think so. The great lesson that is thus learned is that human nature is human nature all the world over. And this lesson, too, may be learned in the library. I speak not so much of the accounts of travelers. Oh, yeah, one other comment. Like, this liberalism that George is espousing, like, this won, right? Like, in his time, there were lots of people who just sort of believed in, scientifically speaking, a kind of racism. Or, I don't know, when was phrenology? The heyday of phrenology, just who had the physically biggest brain. Um, all right, that's a generation before Henry George. But this guy believed in it in 1776 to 1832, 1788, 1858. Yeah, so I guess phrenology kind of died off before George by 20, 30 years, but not too far away. I speak not so much of the accounts of travelers, for the accounts given of savages by the civilized men who write books are very often just such accounts as savages would give of us, did they make flying visits and then write books. But of those mementos of the life and thoughts of other times and other peoples, which translated into our language of today are like glimpses of our own lives and gleams of our own thought. The feeling they inspire is that of the essentially similarity of that of the essential similarity of men. This, says Emanuel Deutsch, this is the end of all investigation into history or art. They were even as we are. They were even as we are. They were even as we are. There is a people to be found in all parts of the world who would well illustrate what peculiarities are due to hereditary transmission and what to transmission by association. The Jews have maintained the purity of their blood more scrupulously and for a longer time than any of the European races. Yet I am inclined to think that the only characteristic that can be attributed to this is that of physiognomy. I am half Jewish, so this is half related to me. And this is in reality far less marked than is conventionally supposed, as anyone who will take the trouble may see on observation. Although they have constantly married among themselves, the Jews have everywhere been modified by their surroundings. The English, Russian, Polish, German, and Oriental Jews differing from each other in many respects as much as do the other people of those countries. Yet they have much in common, and have everywhere preserved their individuality. The reason is clear. It is the Hebrew religion, and certainly religion is not transmitted by generation, but by association, which has everywhere preserved the distinctiveness of the Hebrew race. I don't know a lot about Jewishness. I know that the Ashkenazi Jews, of which I guess is my ethnic heritage, I think around the 1400s or 1500s, was pretty wiped out. So all the Ashkenazi Jews come from a very small genetic pool of people. I don't think that their Hebrew religion has a lot to do with them all physically looking that similar. I think it was the fact that that's what I've heard. Ashkenazi Jew population at its lowest. Yeah, around 1350 AD. So, you know, yeah, 14th century. This is even fewer than I said. 350 individuals of the Ashkenazi Jews. And of course, there are other Jewish populations, but I think in America it's mostly Ashkenazi. But I am not a scholar on this stuff at all. I have not been raised particularly in the Jewish culture, or definitely not in the Jewish religion. Not since I was like 5 or 6. I was not bar mitzvahed. Anyway. This religion, which children derive not as they derive their physical characteristics, but by precept and association, is not merely exclusive in its teachings, but has, by engendering suspicion and dislike, produced a powerful outside pressure which, even more than its precepts, has everywhere constituted of the Jews a community within a community. Thus has been built up and maintained a certain peculiar environment which gives a distinctive character. Jewish intermarriage has been the effect, not the cause of this. What persecution, which stopped short of taking Jewish children from their parents and bringing them up outside of this peculiar environment, could not accomplish, will be accomplished by the lessening intensity of religious belief, as is already evident in the United States, where the distinction between Jew and Gentile is fast disappearing. Yeah, like this, like on whatever this spectrum is, I think in his society, you know, I feel like people were here. George is somewhere to the right of this, here, and then modern day society is like, I don't know, we'll say where George is, or maybe George is even here, and I personally think I'm maybe like I'm right where George is. No, I think I might be a little more over here than George. That's my guess. This is the uh, nature, nurture. This is you know, 1800s. This is 2000s. MC. What color should we have given George? Yellow should have been George. HG. I don't know about this. I mean, who knows? All right. I think that is the end of my daily devotional. 105th episode. See ya, wouldn't want to be ya.